Thanks. Okay, hi, good morning.
Hi.
It's great to be here, but it's also a bit daunting. And this morning I was thinking about why this sense of it being daunting to talk about our fear of freedom. And I think part of it was Krista sent me a WhatsApp yesterday saying we've got great expectations. Of course, that already makes the dauntingness go up. But I think the risk is always, if you get a speaker who is presumably an expert in the field, that the work becomes, or the expectation becomes that the thinking needs to happen here, or the answer needs to come from the front. And I think at best what we can do is to grapple with the uncertainty and the answer together. I think this window behind me that you are looking at is such a great metaphor actually for what we will be thinking through. Because all of us that are in here came from there. Some came from Johannesburg, some came from Pretoria, or the Gautrain is there. It's literally very visible, the fact that in here we are a microcosm of what's happening out there. And the questions that we will be working with, that I'm going to think through with you, are questions, I think, that belong to our broader society. And I think we are at a difficult space at the moment in South Africa. My sense is often that it's difficult to really think together because it's difficult to speak about everything. Sometimes we get into this politically correct mode where there are just so many eggshells to tread upon or to not tread upon, or holy cows to avoid, that it's difficult to really think, because if we are all in a mode of self-censorship in order not to offend one another, then we can't really get the thoughts on the table. And sometimes I think what we lack probably in South Africa at the moment are spaces that are robust enough where we can really grapple with issues, even now and then offend one another, and then realize, okay, what I've just done is I've offended someone, and then learn about that and then go ahead, rather than being so careful, because I don't think we are doing ourselves any favors of being too careful. I'm an organizational psychologist, and my area of speciality is called, it's a field called systems psychodynamics. So it's about the unconscious processes in systems. Meaning that even when we are here in this room, there are processes at play in the mind, in our collective mind here, that we are not always aware of. So my work with clients is to assist, especially management teams, to become aware of how they may be unconsciously or unintentionally jeopardizing what they're actually trying to do. I think the first thing that one needs to acknowledge before we can, I think, do any thinking about what it's like to be together is to acknowledge that everyone that makes up this organization, everyone in this room, everyone on the highway behind us, we all come from a history of imperfect social systems. There's none of us here with a perfect background where there was no pain and no hurt. We all come from imperfect families initially, where we had imperfect examples of how authority is exerted. And here we get together, all from our imperfect, or I can even make a stronger word and say from our different broken histories, we come together in spaces like this one, and we try to do things together. And of course, what you are doing here together is also imperfect. It's certainly not ideal. I'm sure we can do an exercise and put flip charts against the wall to make lists and lists of things that are not going the way they should be going, or the way that you would want them to be going. But that's how it is. And we can only really think about how to improve a system if we can acknowledge that, here with our best intentions, sometimes with our clumsiness, the thing that we are building, that we are creating in order to move something from here to there is full of flaws. And while acknowledging that, it becomes possible to explore these imperfections with a sense of curiosity rather than with a sense of defensiveness. Often we have this ideal in our mind of how a company should be like, or how the world or a society should be like. But the ideal becomes a judge, because the ideal will continuously remind you that you are falling short, that you are not close to that. And that evokes feelings of guilt and shame and blame, because now if it's intolerable to be part of the mistake, it means you don't want the spotlight ever to come to you. So we rather want the blame to go somewhere else, or just put the imperfections under the carpet and pretend they will go away. But they don't go away, of course. And I think over time then, it's almost like cholesterol building up in the arteries. It's as if our mind space becomes so clogged. There are so many unsaid things, so many ignored realities, that we can't have free and honest thought. I think in a country like South Africa, with our history, and at the moment my sense is that is very difficult. It's very difficult for us at the moment to look at our history together and to say, how is that history still impacting us? And what do we have to confront? In Latin, the word confront means to face it together. What do we have to confront in order for us to kind of wriggle ourselves out of the grip of our past? Because if we can't do that, we leave ourselves such narrow avenues of thinking that almost makes it impossible in a complex world to really consider all the different complexities in moving forward. Okay, I want to say one more thing. So I've spoken about the fact that human systems are imperfect and that we can only learn something about them through curiosity. And that there's something like an unconscious that happens below the surface that we are not always aware of. Something else that I want to put on the table before I then move into the content of the talk is the fact that all of us are systemically related. If you think about human systems, it's really systems within systems, adjacent to other systems, with subsystems. It means that anything that happens is a product of everyone that was involved in that. So even if the mistake then manifests in one person around the boardroom table, it's still systemic. Whatever manifests somewhere, it's manifesting there. It doesn't mean that the entire problem sits there. And we are often quite lazy in our thinking. We want to pinpoint things on an individual or a subgroup, or we want to pinpoint something on, let's say, a clash of personalities. So very often, larger systemic phenomena and dynamics manifest through individual behavior and manifest through interpersonal behavior. So what we see is the interpersonal. That's what we feel immediately also, is what the interpersonal evoke in us. But that's only what's manifesting. It's lazy to just stop there, because then we can just imagine, if I can just get rid of this or them, then it'll be all okay. And then we get rid of a pair or a person, and then the behavior still stays behind. If we start thinking systemically, it also makes it a bit easier to explore the system with curiosity rather than defensiveness. Because if I can know that my behavior, even if I upset someone, even if I made a mistake, if I know that my behavior will be viewed from the perspective that whatever happened here, manifested through me, is somehow a product of the system, then I don't have to be so fearful of the ton of bricks that may come down on me. Now, the topic of this talk is our fear of freedom. And I chose this topic because of a quote by Freud that you may have come across, where he says, most people don't want freedom. Because freedom involves responsibility, and most people are frightened of responsibility. So what I was thinking for this morning, to look at if we say freedom, and our freedom here, and I think we can even make it literal and say our sense of being free individuals within the South African context. If I say that this freedom involves responsibilities, and that the responsibilities often cause us to be frightened, what I'm going to do is first discuss the responsibilities that I think come with the idea of freedom, and then look at the anxieties or the fears that are evoked if we are confronted with these responsibilities, and then ask the question, why? So if these responsibilities evoke these fears, and if we know that by staying in the space of fear, we are keeping ourselves from really being free, then why do we carry on doing it? So we'll spend some time on the why. And then finally, the question, so what? Or what now? So for us, in our respective roles as leaders in different contexts, what are we to do given these ideas? And I am going to continue in in this kind of conversational mode, and at times ask you for your thoughts, so that we can really get a space of thinking together. Okay, so before I go to the question of which responsibilities are we thinking about if we talk about real freedom, what I want to ask is, given what I said until now, so until now spoken about the nature of social systems as being systemically related, there's an unconscious, we can only work with these things if we are curious enough. Are there, and linking to the topic, our fear of freedom, what are some of the things that come to mind for you already at this point? And just spend 2 minutes discussing that with the person next to you. So far, what are some of the things or links? Maybe I'm speaking about something and you make a link to your current experience here, or to something in the broader South African context. What are some of the things in your mind now? Just do that in pairs. There we are sitting. Okay. Thank you. Is there anyone who wants to share what I just discussed? Or anyone who would dare to share what I just discussed? It's a great example. Anonymous feedback, showing that it's maybe not safe enough to have your name there. But also the anonymous feedback robs the system of the accountability of standing by what you just said, right? So you can also kind of shoot in the dark and hide. I think you've said it. I think we're done for the morning. One more? And I think something else to keep in mind is, if we think of trauma, psychological trauma for instance, if someone experiences a psychological trauma, what happens is it's as if the mind shatters into many little fragments. And the work of the therapy is to assist the person to integrate the different parts of themselves again. And a similar thing happens with social trauma as well. In the psyche or the mind space of a society or a group that experiences trauma, we also see the fragmentation of mind. And the work then is to have good enough conversations in safe enough spaces in order to bring these fragments together again. But as that gentleman said there, that can be quite scary. Because what if I need to change certain things that I want to hold dear? Let's look a little bit to the responsibilities associated with taking up one's freedom and one's autonomy. I think a very first one that makes it difficult is the responsibility to think for yourself and also to fend for yourself. I think that's very typical. Those of you who are parents, but all of us have been teenagers at some point, but some of us have teenagers as well, and we can see them in their process of loosening up and creating some distance and becoming free. And of course, the flip side of that coin is that freedom comes at a price. They have to take some responsibility. At some point, if you want to live alone and not live with your parents anymore, you have to earn some money in order to fend for yourself, to take up that autonomy. And that can be quite scary sometimes. But also the idea of thinking for ourselves, making up your own mind. I think until a certain age, your thoughts and ideas about things are largely influenced by what your parents and teachers think. Later on, they become influenced by what your friends think. For us, as a group of adults in a country with so many, let's say a country that is still fragmented in terms of thinking, it's quite hard work to make up your own mind and not to just be swept along by whatever is cooked up in the media or whatever is what is said or is okay to say when you are with family. To make up your own mind. And it's hard to start making up your own mind, because then you have to also stand by what you say. You can't be anonymous, for instance, in making up your own mind. Sometimes you'll have to differ from others and not just be swept along. Something else, and I think this may be the most difficult, is really being full persons that are living together with others. Sounds quite simple, but it's not. What we often do is we split the world up into us and thems. And the psychological term we use for that is projection. So I project onto the other that which I cannot tolerate in myself. Now it becomes, now my own mind is more bearable. So the thing that I can't tolerate or acknowledge in myself, in my fantasy world, now this sits over there. So if I can just manage to get that one out of the way, then I may be rid of this intolerable thing. And we do this often. I think in South Africa, if you think of projections between different culture groups, whites, blacks, Afrikaans, English, within the black community, various different culture groups and language groups, men, women, management, labor, DA, ANC, EFF, all these different us's and them's. It's like a mirror that's been shattered, and you see these bits and pieces that are reflected, but you're continuously then treating each other as if the other is only that which I projected onto them. Right? As if the other is not a full person. That's more than. So I'm an Afrikaans man. So of course, when I walk into a room, I do, just because of where I'm from, I do represent something of the past, right? But I am more than that. And then the same goes for a woman, for a black man, for an Indian woman. We are more than what meets the eye initially. In companies, we also do these splits between different divisions. When companies talk about this, there's a silo mentality. You see that the fragmented splits is now in the organization. They are like this, they are like that. But each time, if you treat the other as if, then you're treating them as if they are an object, and not as if they are a full person. Now, if you want to face this harsh world where there's no guarantees, autonomously and in a free way, it helps to have an integrated idea of who you are and who the others are with whom you are dealing. It's because otherwise your chances of doing it successfully are seriously limited. So whilst you are still in the safe confines of your parents' home, where you don't need to think too much, and someone else will bring the bacon, you just need to adhere to some rules. You're not free, but at least if you are doing the rules, then you'll be looked after. Then your projections and your contribution to the us and them in the outside world isn't so threatening. But once you start standing up, walking into the outside world, and you have to interact with others, it really helps if the way in which you look at the world is closer to reality than it is to your internal fantasy. Whether your fantasy has been inherited or not, closer to reality, the better. Seeing that this thing called life can be quite harsh. and it is also quite complex. There's another dimension to this dynamic of projection that's even more powerful, and it's what psychoanalysts call projective identification. So what it means is, so I project something that I can't tolerate in myself onto you. Now I treat you as if this projection is true, and in treating you in that way, I exert pressure on you to act in that way, to identify with the projection. Then you become the object that the other is seeing in you. I think that's what Steve Biko meant when he said the greatest greatest weapon in the hand of the oppressor is the mind of the oppressed. So if the other starts to identify with the narrative, the example that is often used to describe this dynamic is the bullying example on the school ground. So the bully struggles to tolerate his own vulnerability, his own sense of weakness. So unconsciously these things happen, they don't think it through. They scan the playground for someone who seem to be a good receiver of this projection of vulnerability. Okay? Now they act towards that person in a way that's imposing and that's threatening, and if the other identifies and becomes the victim, then the dynamic is on. Then game is on. So it turns around and runs. Now the bully knows, yes, I'm right, that one is weak. I hate weakness, maybe because my own weakness in my own home where I'm growing up is not treated with care. So I can't bear it. So there it goes. If I can get rid of that, then maybe I'm rid of it. That's the dynamic. And these things are very strong and they happen very quickly. You can, as an Afrikaans person, so let me just speak for myself, and as an Afrikaans male in my 40s, you know, it's work, it's psychological and introspective work not to fall in the trap of acting as the one that thinks he knows a bit more. It's as if I have to check it, because I've come from a history where that was the way of thinking. And I think we have to be able to just starting to become aware of this already helps. And we'll look at the anxieties that all these things evoke a bit later. But let's go further down our list of responsibilities that come with freedom. The next one is discipline. There's a trend, I think, in the modern world to be very skeptical of authority and to be very skeptical of discipline. And that's a way of undermining freedom. Let me give an example. So discipline has to do with boundaries. So the one in charge sets the boundaries, right? But the one in charge who sets the boundaries needs to hold him or herself to those self-same boundaries that has been set. So, and that requires discipline. If you've got the power to make the rules, you've got to keep yourself to that rules. Otherwise, the system becomes unsafe. Also, if I want to take up, so I think there we've got examples, and each of us, you know, whether you take a bribe, if you're a government official, or whether you give a bribe to a traffic cop, wherever we take part in the process of undermining the boundaries that will keep us safe, even in our freedom. If we undermine those boundaries, then freedom is really too scary. So last year I got my first motorcycle. And the motorcycle, for those of you who ride motorcycle, will know it gives you this incredible sense of freedom, right? But without the discipline to check the tire pressure, to make sure it's serviced regularly, those things require discipline. And the discipline, even though discipline may sound like something that's old-fashioned and that's something that takes away our freedom, it is that discipline that makes it possible in the first place to get on the motorcycle and to then enjoy the freedom. If, as a country, we want to be successful and autonomous and stand our place full in the world, we have to adhere to certain disciplines. We need to start to make up our own mind about things, think things through. We have to be able to take back our projections on each other. Otherwise, we can't think in the first place, because if we're only here as part objects and not as full persons, what can be thought in the first place, right? So to be able to really make up our own mind, where do we stand within this whole world of the powers in the West, the powers in the East, in the North, our own identity in Africa, but as a unique African country, it's some things to think through. But it will also require discipline, keeping ourselves to the lines in the sand that we draw for ourselves. I think the next responsibility is for us to face our histories and our future together. Meaning, to face our woundedness and to face our desire together. I think there's a lot of the woundedness of our society that has not been worked with at all. And until you heal the wound enough so that the integration can start to happen, so that the fragments can start to integrate, until you do that, the tendency of a social system is to just repeat the trauma. Because unconsciously, the system still wants to make sense. What the hell happened when the first white guys came in Cape Town? Then, what the hell happened when the English came? Then, when the Afrikaners took over? What's happening? It's as if we try to replay this video all the time in order to make sense of that. If our mind can't, if our collective mind can't work with the trauma that we have been inflicting upon ourselves now for centuries, we are prone to just repeat the process. Before I move over to the question around how are we busy currently defending against, or how are we trying to ignore the anxieties that spring out of these responsibilities? Again, why don't you just share with the person next to you just anything that you feel was significant about what, things that you thought now while I was speaking. So just share. I also want to get an idea of what's happening in our mind space here. Thank you. And that's quite hard. Thanks. One more at the back. And I think this desert is the responsibility of going through the desert in order to then get to the promised land, right? Or a place that we at least hope will be better than where we come from. It's quite difficult because the idea scares us. Because at least the place that we know is something that's known. and we know how to deal with that. What will the new place ask of us? Will I even want to be in that new place? It may ask of me more than I'm willing to give. So some of the ways in which we try to avoid working through the anxieties that come up when we think about the desert is one of them is to just continue our process of splitting into black and white, into us and them, because splitting makes a scary, complex situation a little bit simpler by creating categories. So they are all like this and they are all like that. Gives the sense that I can have a grip on life. It makes it a little bit, I don't have to deal with the full complexity of a full human being or on the other side. Another way is to just cling to dependency, to make sure that we don't leave the house. Dependency on your parents, of course, but also maybe dependency on the state. The state will look after us. The government must sort everything out. Or the company must sort things out. The boss must do the thinking. I will just do the walking and the doing. It's easier to be dependent than to really take up the responsibility of freedom. Because then if something goes wrong, it's the other's fault. It's the boss's fault. It's not my fault. And I don't have to face this harsh world on my own. Another way we do this is through apathy, kind of just giving up. So in apathy, I think the underlying dynamic is acting as if I am not part of this whole. Acting as if this whole thing around me, let's say I call it a circus around me, I'm not part of that. So act as if we are not an integrated system. I'll do my thing, I'll go my way, but I'm not part of the whole thing. So, and apathy is, of course, also a defense against the potential hurt of being part of. The potential work of introspection in order to become part of. Another mechanism is fight-flight. So get onto a plane and go to New Zealand, and we leave the whole thing behind, or go to Canada or Australia or wherever. But not only flight out of the country, sometimes just retreating behind our very high walls and our security estates and our private schools and our private security companies and everything that we can do to just keep ourselves insulated as a flight away from grappling with others, with the complexity and the messiness of our wounded past and our very complex and unknown future. Of course, in the political arena, we see the fighting very clearly. So they set up the different straw men and you just attack. Another way is through magical thinking. So thinking that I don't have to take up my responsibility for this freedom, something magical will happen. Wasn't there a word in the media called Ramaphoria? Right? So now with a new president, now everything will be okay. Or if only this or that happens, something magical will happen that will just rescue us and we won't have to deal with the complexity. It's like Peter Pan. I can stay a child forever. If in this never land, and in the magical world, things will work out. But I don't have to take up my own responsibility. Another way that we are doing quite well in South Africa is to attack the boundaries of the institutions that are actually supposed to provide the spaces that are safe enough for us to do the transformational work. Think about that. So think about the organizations or the institutions that connect us to each other. SABC, SAA, Eskom are all institutions that provide connections between people. Unconsciously, we've been getting it right to almost get those institutions to their knees. If we attack the boundaries of the, and then we've got the legal institutions as well. So the legal institutions that also make it safe. So in this dynamic, now I know it's easy to say yes, but it was a specific political strand or political group that endeavored in the whole State Capture Act, and we can say that. But if we are systemically related, we also have to think of how am I contributing to a situation that looks after my self-interest first, before I look at the interest of my neighbors, or my self-interest first at school, before I also look at the interests of the other kids at school and their parents. So if self-interest is a theme in our country, I think we can see how that has been playing out on various levels, because it maybe is just easier to just look after yourself with whatever power you have than to be vulnerable and reach out. I also think what we sometimes do is we demonize success and wealth, as if wealth or success means you have taken something away from. The problem is if we demonize wealth and success, we can't really become wealthy and successful ourselves, because we don't want to become the devil, right? So it's as if we are. I think it's a dangerous strand of thinking, and it requires of us to discern. So these different us and thems that we've had. Yes, one us and them is black-white. Another us and them is rich-poor. These are not exactly the same. Of course, there are correlations. Another us and them is management labor. Another us and them is government private sector. All these us and thems can't just be conflated to a single one, because that makes it difficult for us to really explore the complexity of the problem. But if we demonize success, we are setting ourselves up for failure, because then we can't make it work. So I think maintaining a way in which we are going about to sabotage our freedom and success is by maintaining the splits that makes it impossible for our system in the mind to transform. So transformation, the real meaning of the word means to go from one form to another. Maybe in South Africa we have given it a different meaning in order to protect ourselves from really doing the hard work of transformation. So if we can render transformation to be only a tick box exercise, so many numbers here, so many programs there, etc., 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 then I can at least pretend that I'm taking part in the overall transformation of our society without really doing the very hard introspective work and the hard work of facing not only let's say my contribution or my people's contribution to the woundedness of others, but also to face my people's woundedness due to the fact of taking part in the woundedness of others. So the perpetrator and the victim are both wounded. Neither one of them are free. The perpetrator also needs to look him or herself and each other in the eye and say, wow, is this where we came from? And these different levels of introspection and healing are so frightening, like you said earlier, that may be the reason why we would rather stay in the captivity with our clipped wings with our feet tied, because at least that cage and the rage and the guilt and the shame that are part of that cage, at least those things are familiar. My risk going out of that cage into a space where I and my neighbors can be full persons working on this thing together may require just more than I have the courage for at the moment. And I think the question then is, so what? What now for us? Me and you in our respective roles. So we have put on the table in here that what needs to happen is we need spaces that are safe enough. So, of course, I think the first thing it means is don't participate in any conversation that contributes to the splitting. Just don't do it. If you have the guts in that conversation to show that this is not, we are busy with a fantasy of splitting. We are not busy working with reality. If you've got the guts to do that, of course, do that. Even further than that, if you can, in the teams that you manage, create a space where it's safe enough around the table to think about how that team can become better without feeling afraid of all the mistakes that may have been made. To create a space where it's okay to be curious, where it's also okay to even, in your clumsy attempt, to even offend someone in your clumsiness. Because we can grant each other that, of course, we can't never offend anyone. Sometimes we offend, but if the space is safe enough, I know it's okay. We'll be able to take back. Say, okay, I didn't even realize that this will have that impact. I can take it back and I can think it through. So the real fear, I think, is the fear of facing ourselves. Because to face the other as a full person will first of all require of me to face myself. To face that within myself which I cannot tolerate. To face the fact that I am the oppressor. I am I have in me the ability to really do others harm. I also have the ability to transcend that. But the dark and the light, I have both of them in me. It's much easier for us to pretend that all those capable of murder are in prison. Much more difficult to acknowledge that I have that ability in me. I can be lazy. I can sometimes hide away from responsibility. I can sometimes be very punitive and very pedantic. I have all of that in me. But to face that is quite a hard work. I want to end off with a poem and then open the floor for questions. It's a poem by Maya Angelou. The title of the poem is Caged Bird. It goes like this. The free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends, and dips his wings in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with fearful trill of the things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. The free bird thinks of another breeze, and the trade winds soft through the sighing trees, and the fat worms waiting on a dawn-bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. But the caged bird stands on the grave of dreams. His shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. Thanks. Any questions, comments, offenses that you took? It's okay. I think there are many initiatives by many different groups, because I think this is something we know. Deep down we know what needs to be done. We know we need spaces to talk. So I think there are various NGOs and universities and churches who present various opportunities. I myself has been part of a group that was founded called TILT, the Institute for Leadership and Transformation, that presents workshops and conferences throughout the year, specifically around the themes of how to become aware of how you impact the system in a way that makes the system do exactly the thing that you don't like, right? So that's their programs. There's a program here that you are busy with. And I think that's quite important, because I think it's a mistake to think, you know what, government should do this. Of course government should do that. Yes, they should. But we can't wait for that, right? And whatever government does will also be flawed, just in the way in which this talk has been flawed, and the other things that we offer are all flawed. Nothing is perfect. But to get ourselves away from the dependency on they need to do something, we need to do something. I'm very sure there are life coaches and psychotherapists in close proximity to where you live. There are pastors. There are various ways and mechanisms to really invest time and money in your own introspection. And that's a responsibility that you have over yourself. You've got the mandate. It's your watch. It's your pocket. It's your time. You can invest that in yourself. And I think there's beauty in a session like this. So you are all free to come here or not, right? You're all free also to walk out during the session or not, or to join late. There's no compulsory element. So to create spaces that's attractive to those who will come to work. But then in terms of the busyness, I think there's where you if you are in a formal management role, you've got a lot of power there in that role. And because life is busy, and you do have a lot of things to do, and a lot of things to move from here to there in a very little space of time. But the way in which you do that can be in a way that contributes to critical thinking, taking up autonomy and authority, being honest, not being lazy in terms of splits and projections. If you realize there's a splitting and projection across silos, or this team, or this client, or this or that, to lift the level of thinking, to be more critical and to do the loop. How are you contributing to that? That's something that can be done as part of management practice. Hold the system accountable for thinking. Yes, and holding a boundary, it sometimes means you have to be not nice. And it's okay. Your work here is definitely not to keep everyone happy. That's not your work. Your work is to get things done. And sometimes you have to be not nice. And there's conflict at the boundary, but also a system's behavior comes out at the boundaries. What is produced, by when, by whom, at what level of quality, at what cost, those are boundaries that one can observe carefully. And if you start to see things are going across those boundaries, you may start to ask, what's happening here? But to hold on to the boundaries, even though it makes you unpopular. I don't know. I don't know. Because we often speak about revolution, right? And I think there's a difference between revolution, transformation, and change. Sometimes we change things around just so that it may seem as if we are really doing some transformative work. So it's like rearranging the deck chairs or doing a restructuring or whatever. We make some changes here just to keep things the same. So, right? So sometimes change is used in order to keep the real stuff hidden so that things can actually stay the same. Revolution, the word revolution comes from revolving. It means it turns, right? But it's not only a toppling. Sometimes what happens is it repeats a pattern. So sometimes you see that there may be a toppling, but the pattern remains the same. I think the Animal Farm is the great literary example of how a toppling of power came, but the same dynamic still continued. Transformation is to really move the way we think from one form to another, to really start to think differently, see ourselves differently. And I think that's the hardest work. It's much harder because it means you have to also think of how you are impacting the system. Knowing how much hard work it is. If I think of my clients, how I will, let's say, work with an executive team over the course of a year, and if I think of all the thought and effort and holding of boundaries and confronting issues that has to take place in that room over the course of a year, how difficult it is. If I think of that, and I then think of this space here outside, and then I sometimes feel pessimistic. How will we do that, right? And then again, it happens that with a specific client or in a specific space, something shifts, and you see it's incredible that things can shift. But you can only take responsibility for that which is in your control and that which is in your mandate. Within the way in which you take up your role at the moment in this social system. If you can transform the way in which you take up that role, you already start to transform the system. And that's all you've got power over. Again, in your home is a space where you've got, in your role, you've got the mandate to influence the type of conversation and the type of thinking, the type of words. I think, and there's something on a policy level that is making it difficult, especially I think if I think of my clients. So if you think of a boardroom table, and if there are 8 people on the board, or on the executive committee, and there are 2 black people in that room, what I've often seen is, I think, just the fact that a law like BEE or affirmative action exists puts the black people around the table in a very tricky situation. The work of the ExCo is so complex. Everyone around that table is continuously at the boundary of their own competence and incompetence, because it's just so complex. You're never sure. And And I've seen in black clients of mine that just the fact that there's a law like that, almost it's as if that makes it easier for the other people around the table to project their incompetence, act as if there's one that's not, because maybe that person is only here for the legal requirement. All of us, yes, we are here because of our brilliant competence, and we are always competent and we know what to do, but we're not. The task of a manager is complex, and if you are really at the game, then you're at the boundary between your competence and incompetence. Every now and then you're incompetent. And to make that, I think that's a very important work for management teams, to make that potential dynamic, to make that speakable. You can't change the law, and the law is there for a reason. It's part of our, as I said, this imperfect system that we are building in our best intentioned, clumsy attempt, but there's consequences. To make sure that the consequences are not that people around the boardroom table feel that they have to now work even harder in order to prove their competence. To prove your competence in a highly complex, highly demanding, it's just loading that person up with more than what is fair. So to make that speakable, to keep yourself in check, to keep your own thoughts in check, and to put that on the table, and so that those type of underlying dynamics are not just below the table. It's also a way in which one can affect a change in your company without having to change the law, but just make the impact of the law speakable. How is this impacting us? Wait, you can't just stop now. Because now because I know I touched quite a sensitive topic now. So it's possible that just by touching that may be a bit offensive, right? So I think it's a good. I would just want to hear one or two, even if just responses to that, so we don't make a contribution that goes to the boundary of what may be speakable or what may be a holy cow or not. Don't make those things met with complete silence, because then that evokes other, maybe next time, same thing.
We need to set what happened in the past right, and that's why that law is just and in place. Do you know what I mean?
And because the biases are in place.
Exactly.
The biases are there, and therefore the law is there. It's a fear of freedom. So living in the fear makes it impossible to be free enough to speak your mind, even if you may say the wrong thing. I think that's it.